Hi guys, welcome. And who dat? I'm Joe. Thanks for tuning in to Rosenfield 10, where I cover the Saints. Look at me as a friend or a coworker who loves the Saints as much as you do. And when you see me, we're going to talk about it. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like the video, subscribe to my channel if you want to see a Saints fan talk about the Saints and interact with you as well. Let me know what you think. Today, I am breaking down all of the picks from day two of the 2025 NFL Draft for our beloved, bless you boys, in black and gold, the New Orleans Saints. It's a pretty eventful day two. The Saints had one second round pick and two third round picks, and we'll break it all down here. With the 40th pick in the 2025 NFL Draft, the New Orleans Saints have selected quarterback Tyler Shuck out of Louisville. Apparently, Tyler Shuck was number two on the quarterback list for the Saints. He tried to move up to get Cam Ward. That was reported by Ian Rappaport during the draft on NFL Network, at least. He said the last team the Titans were on the phone with before they selected Cam Ward was the Saints. And apparently we were trying to move up to get Cam Ward. So, when I heard that, I thought to myself, well, maybe we're not that sold on any particular quarterback down the road. So sure enough, with the first round pick, we take a tackle. We don't go quarterback. And I figured, well, cool. We tried to get our guy in the first round, didn't work. Maybe everybody else will be shoved down the lower half of the draft. Well, that wasn't the case. Uh, it was the Giants that traded back into the first round to get quarterback Jackson Dart, and at that point, I thought to myself, well, the Saints aren't going to make a move now for a quarterback. If Dart was number two, well, apparently Tyler Shuck was number two on the Saints list. So let's talk about Tyler Shuck. 6'5", 225 pounds, perfect size for a quarterback. 30 and 3/4 inch arms, 9 and 3/4 inch hands. Well, at least his hands are bigger than 9, so don't have to worry about fumbling all that much, right? Well, I tell you, I was online a little bit yesterday, and seems like the Saints fans hated this pick. Half of them were half of them that hated it because there wasn't a quarterback good enough to take in the second round. There were too many really good players at other positions in the second round, and they kind of hated it for that reason. I think the other half of the Saints fans that hated it because they liked another quarterback more, either Shador Sanders or Jalen Milroe. So lots of reasons not to like it. And then if you look at the player, maybe there's a lot of reasons not to like this guy either. He spent 7 years in college and he wasn't very productive. Every time he had a chance to start, he would get hurt. So he spent 3 years at one college, spent 3 years at another college, and yeah, basically never got to play. No one ever really heard him, never really did anything. But he spent his last year at Louisville. He had a decent season, I think 23 passing touchdowns, I think only 6 interceptions. Showed that he had a really big arm. And apparently, Kellen Moore really likes this. He thinks that the fact that this guy is 25 years old and is going to be 26 in September, he feels like that's a plus. The guy has a lot of experience. He's coming into the league more mature, apparently, more pro ready. So, the things to like about Tyler Shuck, he's got a really good arm. He can make all the throws. It's probably not unlike Spencer Rattler, where the guy's arm is great and can make all the throws. Another impressive thing is he can make off-schedule throws. Well, when we think of off-schedule throws, nowadays we think of Patrick Mahomes and all of that success. But you can also think, as an old person like me, of a guy like Brett Favre, who, yeah, he was a great quarterback, but he also threw a lot of off-schedule balls that turn into interceptions. So Shuck makes a lot of bad decisions, especially when he's under pressure. Now, that's another thing that reminds me of Spencer Rattler. He's not great under pressure. Now, Rattler will take a sack or 40, and Shuck apparently likes to chuck the ball away instead of take those sacks, but he's been hurt so many times with major injuries. He may never feel comfortable in a pocket again. So overall, what do I think about it? Well, Kellen Moore as our head coach, former quarterback coach, offensive coordinator. This guy is a quarterback. And he's been with three different teams and never really got to choose his own quarterback. Now he's with the Saints, and he inherits a quarterback that Pete Carmichael wanted. He inherited a quarterback that Clint Kubiak wanted, and he inherits Derek Carr, a quarterback that Dennis Allen wanted. So he's got a room full of quarterbacks he didn't really want. And DiNucci's the only one he might actually kind of, you know, kind of maybe wanted, just as a, my system, let's teach the lingo kind of thing. But when does Kellen Moore get to choose his own quarterback? If he's going to be the quarterback guru and the OC, now he's the head coach of the Saints, it's his team. It's his time to get a quarterback. So he goes and gets Tyler Shuck. I say they're married in sickness or in health till death do they part. And if Shuck is no good, well, then that's going to reflect on the head coach, and maybe he won't be our head coach for very long if the guy doesn't turn out to be that good. But then another part of me thinks since Tyler Shuck is only a second round pick, not a first round pick, that maybe we cut our losses sooner than later. So, how long do you keep a second round quarterback starting and failing before you decide to move on? See, normally you draft a quarterback in the first round, he has a bad rookie season, you want to stick it out. Even if they look horrible after two seasons, like let's say Bryce Young, you might change your mind and want to switch, and then you go ahead and switch back, and then maybe after year three, it starts to all click. And so, usually with those first round quarterbacks, you give them some time, maybe the whole rookie contract, before you make the decision to move away from them. Well, do you pull the trigger faster with a second round quarterback that's failing? I think you got to at least give the guy a couple of years. So perhaps we're not in the market for a quarterback next year, regardless of how bad the team struggles in this upcoming year. It's a shame because the quarterback class in next year's draft is supposed to be better. And if we're giving an ultimate failure a chance and it just crashes and burns, then yeah, it's going to reflect poorly on Kellen Moore. But this is Moore's guy. I don't know if it was his first choice. Sounded to me like as though Cam Ward was our first choice, was Moore's first choice. And so I got to just roll with the punches. This is Moore's guy. This is the guy he wanted. He could have had Sanders. He could have had Milrow. He could have waited and taken a quarterback later like Quinn Ewers or Will Howard or Kyle McCord, and we could have just seen, what happens. So part of me thinks he wasn't that committed to the guy because he didn't take Shuck in the first round. Part of me thinks he's just a player like everybody else. He falls into a slot. A second round pick is where Kellen Moore wanted to spin the pick, and he was able to. Yeah, regardless, this is his choice. He gets a chance to finally have a choice, and now we have to give both of them a chance. So I'm not going to critique the pick too terribly. All these things take 4 years before we really figure out what's happening. There have been draft classes in the past where on the weekend it happened, I thought it was great, and those classes turned out to be pretty bad. And I think right now the Saints fans are pretty blah about this class so far. And hopefully we'll all be surprised. It's hard to give our front office credit when we've gone astray for so long now, years. But that's our number two pick, the second round pick, Tyler Shuck. So he makes a lot of off schedule throws. He's got a great arm. Maybe there's something there. Maybe he's more pro ready than the rest of the quarterbacks. Maybe we'll see success sooner than later. One thing's for sure, we have to give it a chance. And so that's where I'm at. It's Kellen Moore's guy. With every week that passes, that Shuck is not a good player and proves that he's not a good player. It'll reflect very poorly on Kellen Moore and his decisions. So I hope Moore knows what he's doing. I think he would have got a pass if he wouldn't have got a quarterback this year and struggled, especially if he'd have used all the junk he inherited. But he chose one, and now they are wedded till death do they part. In sickness or in health, and I hope it's a healthy relationship. All right, day two continues. The Saints had two third round picks. With pick 71 in the 2025 NFL Draft, the New Orleans Saints selected defensive tackle Vernon Broughton out of Texas. All right, so I'm not a professional scout. I've done a bunch of these mocks though, so I've got that going for me. And hey, that's not a way to judge player personnel. Well, I wonder sometimes how these NFL teams do it because every team manages to miss on half of their draft picks. So I know it's an inexact science. And no matter how good you think you are when you nail a draft like in 2017, you will go years and years and years picking a bunch of guys that you thought after all that time and money spent was going to be something and turns out to be not. So, anybody that criticizes where regular fans like me get their information, I mean, I'm just part of a big pool of guesses and nobody gets it right. Otherwise, every quarterback ever drafted would be great. Okay. Everyone gets it wrong. So when I give my opinions about these players, it is from a layman's point of view. It's from doing a ton of mock drafts. It's from looking at dozens of sites. It's it's after looking into over 200 prospects. And yeah, maybe there's something about Vernon Brought, our new defensive backs coach, positional coach, Terry Joseph. He comes from Texas, where he was a positional defensive back coach there. And I figured we would probably dip into the Texas pool because they had a pretty good team this past year. Our first round pick, Kelvin Banks Jr., comes from Texas, and so does Vernon Broughton. So here's the numbers on Vernon Broughton: 6 foot 5 inches, 311 pounds, 35-inch arms, which is insane. 9 and 1/4 inch hands. So how do I feel about Vernon Broughton? I thought Vernon Broughton was a day three prospect. I thought that he was an option for the Saints if we didn't address defensive line. At over 300 pounds, he can play anywhere on the line. He was at Texas, he was next to Alfred Collins, who was bigger than him. So Broughton was pretty much a 311-pound three tech. And if you're that big and you're able to move around a little bit up and down the line, Broughton says he can, well then, he can be out there on early downs as a 3-4 in. So I see the fit for the type of player he is. Also, he's really good against the run. So we need that in our front. Of all the defensive linemen the Saints currently have, none of them are good against the run. It's just a fact. So Vernon Broughton comes in here as a run stopper. Great. I think it's a position we needed, and you addressed it with the type of player I would have addressed it with. A versatile guy who has one thing going for him coming out of college, and that's being good against the run. The issue is Vernon Broughton was always a day three player to me. And there were players like Jared Ivey out of Ole Miss and Elijah Roberts out of SMU that were still on the board. I think Jordan Birch may have still been on the board. So there were players like that that I thought of first before Broughton. Broughton was a 6 round projection up until about a month and a half ago. People were watching Collins and they realized Broughton was pretty good too. So he ascended the draft boards, and I believe by the time the draft started this weekend, Broughton was expected to be a 4th round pick. So to me, he's a reach, and he's a big reach at 71, especially with the players that were there and the needs the Saints have. I just look at the board differently. I'm not in the room interviewing these players. So our secondary coach knows Broughton well, and also our new defensive line coach, the old LSU defensive line coach, who used to be with Texas and who got to coach Vernon Broughton. They have a really good relationship. So you've got several coaches on the Saints staff saying Broughton's a guy to get. You go ahead and get him at the top of the 3rd round. Feels like a bit of a reach to me, but we'll see. Broughton does not bring any pass rush skill at all. Kind of reminds me of Cam Jackson out of Florida, who I talked about before. A guy with really long arms who can play well against the run, but shows nothing versus the pass. Well, all right, so those 35-inch arms by Vernon Broughton, that can be an issue for offensive linemen. And what I got to answer that. Hold on. All right, so ultimately, with those long arms, Broughton can dictate the opposing offensive lineman, kind of get them off of him and then make a move off of that. The problem is he's got an initial step that's pretty quick, but other than that, I don't find he's very fluid. Um, his athleticism tested okay. That's another reason he rose up the boards. But what I see when I watch the player is a guy who's got potential, and with those long arms, he's got a big advantage. He can get off of those blocks and he can make a move on the running back. He can make a move in the backfield. So we'll see if that works out. Personally, right now, initial thoughts, it's a reach. Every position is a position of need. I just think there were a lot of players brought in size that had a little more production. But hey, you've got several coaches vouching for him. We go and grab him. I don't even project that he'll even come close to even thinking about being a Pro Bowl player. But Vernon Broughton's a piece. We got him. Let's see if he surprises. And with our last pick on day two, the second pick that we had in round three, pick 93 overall, the New Orleans Saints selected safety Jonas Sanker out of Virginia. This is a guy that I really like, and he's a guy that I mock to the Saints constantly on day three. But here we are drafting him on day two. Sanker had a bit of a rise right in the last couple of weeks. I was able to get him in the mocks in the 5th round, sometimes the 6th round. And then 2 days before the draft, or the day before the draft, all of a sudden he was ranked in the top 125 players and looked like you better get him in the 4th round or else. There were two players at safety that I was really eyeballing late in the draft if we didn't get around to getting one. I was thinking Caleb Ransaw out of Tulane or Jonas Sanker out of Virginia. Well, that's players I would have gone for in day three had I not addressed the safety before that. There was another player at safety still on the board when we drafted Sanker, and that was Xavier Watts out of Notre Dame, who I was pretty high on. And I was pretty excited to see what Watts could do in our defense with a guy like Tyron Matthew being a guy to teach him and stuff. I was excited about that prospect, but no, we get Sanker instead. Now, Sanker's a thumper. He's a very good tackler. By the way, Watts was drafted shortly after that and went to the Atlanta Falcons. So we're going to see Watts twice a year. So what does Sanker bring to the table? Sanker is 6 foot, 206 pounds. So really good size for a safety. 32 and 1/4 inch arms, 9 and 3/4 inch hands. Jonas Sanker he tested pretty good. I think that's the reason why the Saints are reaching in the third round for the guy. That's the reason he moved up to the fourth round here in the last week of the mocks. He ran a 4.48, which is really good. He had a 36.5 inch vertical and he had a 10 foot, 8 inch broad jump. So a lot of explosion here, a lot of burst. He's pretty instinctive. And he racked up a ton of tackles. I mean, I believe he had over 100 tackles this year. Last year, I think he was at 91. The year before, he was in that 60 to 90 range. He's always leading the team in tackles, and that's what you see a lot in the highlights. Now, apparently, he's got some instincts deep too, but a lot of the safeties in this class were either one or the other, and most people associated Sanker with being a guy in the box. And with all those tackles, how can you blame him? Well, he has so many tackles that that's where some of the negative comes in. He takes bad angles sometimes. And, if you have that many tackles, you must be taking pretty good angles most of the time. But it comes up every now and then, bad angle, and then, he's not great. He's not the greatest as a deep safety. But he's a third round pick. I think he's versatile enough that that's why we drafted him. Staley probably sees him as a piece that will function well in this defense. The DBs have to be versatile. And I can say one thing about Sanker that's better than Watts is Sanker's a better tackler. So if it all comes down to we need better tacklers on the field, I can't argue with that. This team isn't very good at tackling. We haven't been for years. And so if we get guys that are really good tacklers, that's great. So overall, Tyler Shuck, we have to wait and see. If he's a special player, we'll find out soon enough. And yeah, I'm going to give Kellen Moore the benefit of the doubt. I'll let him have his choice and I'll give them a chance. Vernon Broughton, he's got a bit of a concerning missed tackle rate for a big boy in the middle of the defensive line, but overall, he's a solid run stopper, plays the run well, forces the plays into other areas and stuff like that. And he may be a piece that we're missing on the D line. I just don't see potential Pro Bowler at all with this player. You usually don't with defensive tackles. I mean, they play a part. It's usually a inglorious choice, a position for stats, but I'm not too high on that one. And then safety, Jonas Sanker, who I really like. But Broughton and Sanker, I feel like, are day three guys. If Sanker turns out to be great, that's great. I've always had a pencil circle around him as a guy to grab later in the draft if you don't get one early. So that's where we're at on day two. That's my recap. I'm not going to give a grade for any of this. We're going to figure it out in a couple of years, year four. When these contracts are up and you decide whether you're going to keep a player and re-sign them, that's when you really know how good your draft class is. That's my video. I'm Joe, and I will be making another one breaking down the day three prospects later on today. Subscribe to the channel. I'm also going to do a video on Sunday breaking down our 16 undrafted rookies. And until then, I'll talk to you later. Who dat?